my name is Caroline Clifford. You're listening to the Need to Work podcast, a podcast where I interview different comedians about a bit of theirs that perhaps isn't working as well as they hope, and we try and fix it together. This week, I am joined by none other than Myq Kaplan, who is actually a professional comedian, a very professional comedian, who's been on all the most famous US talk shows, tours all around the world, has got loads of specials out, loads of albums, and is just a really great dude. We had such a good chat, and he has so much good advice for up-and-coming comedians, and just lays it out in a super awesome way. So I had such a brilliant time interviewing him. So please enjoy this very special episode. Welcome, Myq Kaplan, to my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I was so thrilled when you said you wanted to be on it.
Yeah, I love reading your newsletter. It's always funny and informative, and so I figured it would be fun to talk to you.
That's so nice. I have to admit, I didn't know you outside of Substack before, although my American friends certainly do. And I was just like in a park, and I had my phone out because I'm an addict, and I had a notification. It said, Myq Kaplan liked your Substack post. And my friend was like, oh my God, is that the Myq Kaplan? I was like, yes, the Myq Kaplan from Substack. And he was like, oh no, he's like huge. And then of course I looked you up, and you're on like late night and all this stuff. And I was like, oh wow, it was like extra thrilling. So
I appreciate it. Thank you. And look, and I'm just a person like you, you know. You're right.
Shall I call you Your Majesty or nah?
It's up to you. Yeah. Cool.
And I think that, the people I've had on here before and the people that I work with, they're usually aspiring professional comedians. And I guess you yourself are a professional comedian. So
I am.
That's fun.
Yeah. I mean, the track that I sent you is from an album that I released in about 2018, arguably. It's a longer, unimportant story, but the jokes that are in it are like from earlier when I was more aspiring, and I did my best to make them full jokes, but I'm excited to talk about them. But yeah, I've been a professional only. I've been doing only comedy since about 2008.
We should really get into the beginning bit of this.
And when I started doing comedy, here's an example of jokes that I would tell that I thought, these were things I said on purpose to be funny at 24, to demonstrate to you what chance did I have when I was 12? The first couple jokes I remember telling were like, I went to Philadelphia, which, do you know that they didn't actually call it Philadelphia before? The original name for it was Liberty Bell Town, but they changed it. It didn't have the right ring to it. Anyway, where's everybody going? So that was one of my first jokes. Another one was, I used to work at a bread factory in charge of the wheat bread, but one day I screwed up, came in drunk, and everything went awry. What's happening? You know what I mean? And that was what I thought was good for all people.
What's great about this is that, and I think a lot of people should take note of this, is that that this is a bit that isn't really working. That's why you brought it here. But then you make a joke out of the fact that it's not working. You've found a way to, in a meta way, make it good by sort of saying, adding these little tags to it, like I thought that would work for all people. That's one of my favorite things that you say. That's a thing I thought would work for all people. What's that little thing you say? Like, what up? Like, where's everyone going? So I really like that, and that's just a really good technique to make this thing. So we haven't really got into the bulk of this bit yet, but obviously you are describing jokes that don't work. So in a way, that's not really what I meant.
Yes.
But yeah, obviously it's really good. I wonder, I had a thought that maybe you could, have you ever thought about rewriting them in that bit? Like, this is how I would do it now, or is it just impossible?
That's a good question. I mean, I do think about it. The fact is, I mean, I have so many other like newer ideas that I'm happier with and more, invested in exploring. So like if I had literally an infinite timeline, then yes, I would be like, oh, and every once in a while I do go back and revisit older things. Like if it comes up for some reason, like if I'm, booked to do a corporate show or a show where like cleanliness is key, then I'll be like, oh, let me go through the archives and dig things up. And then they kind of, even if I've recorded them on an album, and usually when I record it on an album, it's done. And then I stop working on it.
This is a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
I would say. I suppose I meant more as a concept, like going back into old bits, and just because like you're so meta with what you do, and you're talking about the process as well.
Yeah.
That I just thought it would conceptually, it was kind of it would be a fun idea.
Yeah,
of like
with
thinking these old jokes.
With this one in particular, I think the answer is yes. In this way, that like as in the bit, I say that I'm comparing a time when I made a joke when I was 12 to a time when I started comedy at 24, and then this particular album was recorded when I was 36. So I had in my mind, I'm like, okay, every 12 years something happens with this. So maybe like I'm 45 now, and so in a few years I'll be 48, which will be the next multiple of 4, which would be the perfect time to revisit. Just structurally speaking. But yeah, I mean, I do feel like. I mean, I keep a record of, I have a file called like all jokes, and just on my computer, it's, I think, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million words.
Wow.
It's like just hundreds and hundreds of pages, maybe even thousands at this point. And so every once in a while, like if I'm like, oh, I haven't written a new thing in a while, or if I want to explore something that I hadn't thought about, I'm like, I'll just go back through my oldest things and be like, oh, what did I think was good that I didn't fully explore? Because most of these things are things that I didn't even ever get to try on stage just by sheer numbers. So, but yeah, every once in a while I remember I revisit something and I'm like, yes, absolutely. What does, the adult version of me, what am I capable of turning this, this child's drawing into, can it be like a beautiful new piece of like art that I'm proud of? So yeah, short answer, yes.
I know what you mean though about going back to jokes. It's like once they're done, and it feels weird. It's like looking at old photos of yourselves, just like, ugh. No thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, and especially when I'm like releasing them. I mean, these days also it's strange because everything is changing so much in terms of like, now I'm going back through old videos and being like, okay, which one of these can be clips? And so I'm going like through a special of mine from 10 years ago and I'm like, oh, this part's good. Ooh, do I want this one to be out there for social media to see? I'm like, it is out there for literally anyone can see it. It exists, which is, again, I guess sort of a macrocosm of what we were talking about earlier. Like, I'm glad that when I look back at, versions of myself that existed before, I'm like, ooh, here's a joke that I mostly talk about this joke on podcasts. I rarely do it live, but because maybe it's more for an audience of comedians. But like truly, when I started, I thought I was great. And I had a lot of, delusional self-confidence. And a year in, I look back and I'm like, oh, that wasn't very good. But thank God I'm good now. And then a year later, that wasn't very good. Thank God every year, that wasn't very good. But thank God I'm good now, until eventually, more than 20 years into comedy, I finally know that I could use some more work. But like there's a Zen master named Shunryu Suzuki who, one of my favorite quotes from him, he says, you are all perfect just as you are, and you could use some improvement. Like, that's true and beautiful, and like we all are constantly, the best version of ourselves that we've ever been, hopefully, and also not done. So hopefully there can be continued growth and evolution. But yeah, so when things are recorded though, I'm like, I've had experiences where I recorded a special and then like a week later, I hadn't retired all the material. So I'm telling one of the jokes and I come up with a tag that's better than what's in the recorded version. I'm like, well, I guess people just don't get to hear me. I'm like, unless there's like a Mitch Hedberg album, his second album. He's like, at one point he's like, I got a joke that I told on my first album that I wrote a new line for, so I want to tell it, and so here it is again. And I think like he was my first favorite comedian.
I mean, why the hell not? Like, do that though. It's your stuff, as you say. It's your gig. It's your material. You get to do what you want.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like even just saying that now, like something is jarring loose in my head because I've been recently, more than ever before. There's like a couple lines. I'm like. In the past, I was like, that's that show, and it's done, and the stuff that's in it doesn't go in. Hold on one second. My recorder stopped doing its thing.
Oh my goodness.
But now it is continuing. Okay, everything.
Do you know when it stopped?
No, it looks like
All
something
right.
just popped up, but it has been recording this whole time.
Cool.
So I think we're good. So I used to think that if it's in a show and it's been recorded, then it's done and those jokes don't go anywhere else. But then I now have some shows where I'm like I had a joke about, my relationship or my girlfriend, and it's recorded, but I'm like, now when I start talking about my girlfriend, I'm like, I want to tell that joke again. It's a joke that I like, that fits, and it leads into other things nicely. And so if people, I guess I used to imagine that people completists, Myq Kaplan completists, would listen to all of my comedy, and then they'd be mad. They'd be like, hey, the thing that you said 17 minutes into hour number 11 is the same thing that you said 48 minutes into hour number 4. What are you trying to pull? Why am I...
And that completist is you.
Yeah.
You're the ultimate Myq Kaplan completist, and you're also the voice in that head. It's
100%. Yeah. So now I'm like, oh yeah. I love this. I feel like, speaking of Seinfeld, I feel like when he was the gold standard when I was starting of that's how you do it, right? When there was a story that he never missed a night on stage for 18 months. And that's what you got to do. You got to just keep doing it night after night after night, every night. And then I remember hearing Pete Holmes talk about that on his podcast. And Pete's like, what if one night I just want to stay home and watch The Dark Knight? Why can't we do it my way? And I was like, yeah, I think both of those are valuable, perspectives to have. And I'm like, I'm not going to do it either of their ways. I'm going to do it my way, which, we can take in all of the wisdom from people out there who are doing things in a way that is successful to us. If we're like, I like how that person does their art or how they live their life, so I'm going to listen to them and then apply it your own way. So yeah, absolutely. It would be really something to I could, set out to record that whole track again, but better,
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, you absolutely can. But also, I think it's it's taking this small good idea, which is that you should cycle through material and you should, the thing you wrote now is better than the one before, and then kind of making it into this complete infallible philosophy that can never be broken. It's okay, whoa, slow down there, soldier. It's okay. You can rewrite a joke.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
Yeah. It's, I've... A joke that I tell sometimes is, and which is also true, I've learned a lot about Buddhism recently from Instagram and bumper stickers, like you do. But truly, I have a friend who is a practicing Buddhist, and I have read a lot about it. And, one of the main concepts in Buddhism is the middle path, it's not nothing, it's not everything, it's something, And so if we sort of lionize or, put on a pedestal any of the extreme ideas, always do this or never do this, these things can be guidelines. And I remember listening to a Buddhist teacher named Joseph Goldstein recently, and it's sometimes the advice is going to be opposite. He's like, if you're heading down a road and you're veering to the left, then the advice will be hey, lean to the right, And if you lean too far to the right, then back to the left, which way what's the right way to go, left or right? Well, it depends. Which way are you too far in the direction of? So yeah, being too precious about the map, and instead of the territory, having an idea of how you want it to be rather than examining how it actually is and could be.
Damn.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I want me some of those bumper stickers. They sound like good bumper stickers.
They're good bumper stickers.
So just slightly off the record.
Yes.
This particular track. So you brought it here for which part specifically? Is it the bit that's coming up, which is the pirate bit, or just kind of all of it?
I mean, I guess in a grander scheme, all of it. Yeah, I feel free to dig into any or all of it that you want. I mean, the part that truly was the joke that never worked is the pirate parrot of it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Well, we'll play that right now.
But the joke was something about how pirate and parrot sound similar, and also a pirate often has a parrot. And that's not the whole joke. But that is almost the whole joke. It's weird also to have jokes about pirates like that I wrote before pirates came back. Like, it used to be like, pirates, like, ancient Egyptian mummies. But then, like, pirates started, like, murdering people and taking people hot. I was like, oh, God, I guess I don't do this joke anymore. Like, I had another one that was just a cute joke about, how I feel like the skull and crossbones was a dangerous logo to have for the pirates. Because it also means poison, but maybe the pirates didn't know that. They just look at a jug and they're like, ooh, pirate juice. I love it, you know what I mean? They kill themselves with Drano. That's why all the pirates run away, but now they're back. They're stronger than ever. Drano immune pirates, I bet. But pirate and parrot, the joke was something like, how could that be a coincidence? Maybe the first person who was like forming a pirate crew was like, go get me, maybe he had an accent. He's like, go get me some pirates. And the guy didn't, he had a knife, so the guy was like, I don't want to ask for any confirmation, so I'll just go and get some parrots, and came back with parrots. And the guy was like, no, not parrots, parrots! It's like, you have to, okay, I'll go get, what is it that you want? He's like, seafaring cutthroats. Oh, pirates, I got it, okay, so you guys see how that could be a joke that never worked. And,
I mean, I love all the little bits in it, of course. That's what makes it special. I mean, pirate juice is just golden as far as I'm concerned. That really made me laugh out loud.
Thank you.
And I'm a comedian. I very rarely laugh at anything. I'm dead inside. But the first thing that struck me when you said the premise of that pirates and parrots sound very similar is that my brain just went, no, they don't. Maybe that's the whole problem with it, is that they sound kind of similar, but not similar enough for an entire piece. But
yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, I mean, that your initial reaction to it, I think probably aligns with the voice of the people, Like, I think that, here's the thing. One time, Jacqueline
Yes.
Novak, Jacqueline and I were actually, when we both came to Edinburgh for the first time for the Fringe in 2018, and she was working on the show that would then be recorded 6 years, 5-6 years later as Get on Your Knees, which is on Netflix now. And I remember, and she's a friend, and there's so many things. Okay, the reason I'm bringing her up is one time she said to me, she's like, Myq, I think a lot of people might say that your comedy is about words, but I don't think that that's correct. She's like, I think that your comedy is about a man obsessed with words. Yeah. And I think that the bit about pirate and parrot, like, by itself, as I first envisioned it, it is not a joke that is for everyone. It is hardly it is an observation that, these two words, they start with a P sound, they have an R in the middle, they have a T at the end. And the vowels are, the final vowel is a schwa, and the first vowel is really the only one that is different. So I do stand by they're very
similar for sure.
Like, compared to many other words like pirate and ninja, very different, And I bring up ninja because as I was thinking of it, this particular album was actually recorded kind of as a lark of a kind. Like, it was, I was booked to do a show at a venue that a friend of mine ran, and they had recording equipment, and I was like, oh, like, it wasn't a set that I'd been doing, like, working out for weeks, months, years. It was like a bunch of jokes that were kind of like piecemeal, like they existed, but they didn't fit with other, like, larger shows that I was doing. So I was like, oh, I'd like to get these down. And so I had like a set list, and I'm like getting through them. And so I feel like if I ran this set through, the normal, boot camp process that I do with most of my comedy, then there are parts where I've been like, oh, in addition to saying a mummy, I would have added more examples of like a pirate, like a ninja, like a robot, like things that concepts of. So I feel like there's so many ways that I immediately see that I could improve it. And definitely, especially the fact that, I mean, if I were going to talk about this today, I would talk about the Jacqueline Novak point that, like, the thing that's funny about this is not that pirate and parrot sound similar and pirates have parrots. The main thing that is, like,
the
interesting
unraveling
about it, Yeah, is how much I cared about it, is how much it meant to me. And the idea then that things mean so much to us that other people perhaps won't understand exactly why, but they can understand because there are things that are meaningful to everyone. Like, each individual has something that they care about that other people would be like, why do you care about that? Like, almost, I think I'll say almost across the board, it would be hard to imagine someone who shares everything that they deep down care about and have everyone else be like, nope, that all checks out. That makes sense. You're just a regular, normal person. No questions, no notes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's I'm doing my best to sort of treat your material as if it's like sort of recorded at an open mic kind of thing. But this is like an album that you made. So really, it was such a moot point because everywhere you go with it is really great and really made me laugh. Even when you have something that quote unquote is not working, you make it work. And that's what I often say to students is don't throw anything away. Not at first, because you might find a new angle for it. It might just be that it needs to go back in the oven. And you always find that you're not going to bloody record it if it's like a shit joke, are you? Like you made a good joke out of it, and that's that it's good. So it's not. And I totally agree with what Jacqueline said. It's such a great point. It's not about words. It's about the man unraveling in front of us.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And also, I mean, I think that because obviously, yes, on one level, this is an album that I decided to release because I was happy with the way, the jokes go. And also here I am in the future being like, oh, it could be better. It's perfect as it is. And there's room for improvement. But just to the point of, I feel like I had to get good in between the jokes because otherwise like an open mic experience is like that one. No. That one, no. That one, at least, like, I figured out, I didn't realize while it was happening, but it serves me so well to this day. Like, I have so many great jokes about how so many of my jokes aren't great, Like, that's a place that I've gotten to. Like, a thing I say now on stage sometimes in between jokes is that I think I'm the best comedian working in between jokes, That, like, a lot of other comedians lay down these careful bricks, and I'm like, I think we can do it all with mortar, And I think this particular joke, like, it is both. So I feel like I understand why it is both, like, completely imperfect for your purposes here, but also, like, I'm willing, like, I'm on your side for anything that you see that could be better about it, because I do feel like it's not a trick. It's a good tool to have in the tool belt as a comedian to be able to respond in the moment when things don't go as planned.
Totally.
Like, it's great to have a plan, and it's great to deviate from the plan. And this whole album is kind of a plan with many deviations where I just, have all of these points, these like, like the wave particle duality of comedy where I'm like, I've got these points and then a bunch of riffs in between that like connect them that, if something didn't work at all, I would have edited it out. But if something, has something fun to it, like something interesting, like that's another point, I guess, that, ultimately as a comedian, I remember reading in one of your recent newsletters, like the idea that you don't, I assume this is especially when you're starting out, you don't need to have a narrative. You don't have to have a through line. You don't have to have an arc. People might not even notice if you do. It's a lot harder to make that work. And if most people are just going to be happy with an hour of funny jokes.
Yeah, definitely. And it will feel like it has a narrative because it's about you. It's about the man that likes words. So that's a story in itself. It doesn't have to be. And even when you read books about writing, like by Stephen King and stuff like that, like he hates narratives. He just sort of comes up with a big premise, like, what if there was a big fucking scary dog in a small town? What then? And then he just like has a few characters and puts it in Maine, and that's the movie Cujo.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I was on the edge of my seat waiting to find out.
I wrote down 2 notes about that. The first I've already said,
Please.
Which is they don't sound that alike. And the second was I feel stupid giving you notes like a beginner. What about the Drano? Like it could be this this thing that they're sort of into. Like, hey Frank, do you want some Drano? It's like, oh no, I'm really trying to, like it just being a pirate drink. I don't know. That was the only other thing I had.
Oh yeah, and he's like, yo ho ho, and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm off the yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Number one, like, I understand why you're saying, your own disclaiming of your offering notes, but this is like, we can all learn from each other. We can all, we can all improve, and we all have different angles. Like, I mean, I think it's so valuable I think that just on maybe a macro or a meta level, like, to have people, like, in addition to audiences, obviously you can just do it with the audience, but to have people who care about you and know you, like, if you're starting out with other people, be like, oh, like, you like some of their jokes, they like some of your jokes. It can be so invaluable, not to just listen to what they say blindly, but to have people offer, like, that's a whole new avenue for this joke to go into. Like, I remember seeing Mike Birbiglia do a workshop once at the Comedy Studio in Boston. And he was basically like, when I was starting out, I thought my jokes were killing, and they were, but they weren't like, they were killing here. And he, like, puts his hand, like, at a low level, and he's like, I didn't realize they could be killing here at a higher level. And I think that the way that can happen is by
what's next with that, by the way? It's just like 4 payments of $4.99, and you're like
all you have to do is just throw time at it till it's a thing. I mean, truly, in this example, like, talk to a friend, talk to somebody whose comedic sensibilities you appreciate, and then if they're like, what if you did this, or what if you went in this direction, and then that can open just a doorway into a whole new, avenue of places that you can take it, and then eventually, I think you can do that for yourself, like look back at old things that you've created at some point and be like, so this is the way it went. This is how I looked at it then. I'm like, what if I was a different person? Imagine a friend of yours looking at it. Imagine a teacher looking at it. Imagine, like, you have all these people in your head. You have all these perspectives, all these voices. Like, what would my friend Abe say about this? What would my dad say? What would my mom say? And I mean, to your point, I think it's, if I were recording this joke tonight, or if I were telling this joke again, which maybe I will, I would 100%, like, never thought to say, maybe they don't sound that much alike. Like, that could truly like be, I would be really interested to find out, like, spend a lot of time really doubling down on how much I think. I'm like, I can't understand why people can't see the truth. Why doesn't everybody, like, immediately carry me out on their shoulders for seeing the similarity of these two words, and then just at the end, like, maybe they're not that similar, just it's perfect.
I
That's
wonder if it's like an American English
comedic
thing as well, because, like, parrot, pirate, it is actually more similar, whereas to me it's like parrot and pirate. I mean, come on, guys, that's quite a different that sound in the middle.
Yeah, your mouths are doing totally different. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could. The two ways to go with it are to do a lot more, like a lot more in depth, or to do a lot less. Like, those are often
the fine
your options.
balance, isn't it? Yes, right. And you're based in New York, which is arguably the hardest place to do comedy, possibly in the universe. So that's huge, I think.
Yeah, I haven't been to other solar systems, but definitely in this one, it's. I mean. Yeah, I always recommend. I started in Boston, and I think that was great. I think, like, in the States at least, any city that's not New York or LA, like, the biggest city that you can start in that's not New York or LA is a great place to start, because they probably got a few different clubs, and then, like, a scene. There's probably dozens, if not, could be hundreds of comedians, and but New York is like another just order of magnitude. I mean, I couldn't even tell you, there's probably thousands of people doing comedy in varying degrees, from the spectrum of, professionals to do it once and never do it again. But there's just so many clubs, any night, probably dozens of shows happening, if not more than that. So it's just, it's a big pond.
I mean, people say that about Berlin, where it's an amazing place to learn stand-up comedy, because we have so many shows, and believe it or not, the ground is still pretty fertile here. Like, you'll still get an audience of sometimes up to 12 people, which I hear is huge. Like, people that are not themselves comedians. So it's a really good place to learn. But then, of course, when people are hitting the glass ceiling, which happens pretty quickly here, they want to go to a place. Of course, the nearest big scene to here is London. But I know people who are Americans who've gone straight to New York City and stuff like that, and they say it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone's individual results may vary because that is life. But yeah, it's great to get as good as you can somewhere. Definitely, I think it's always, if you have to choose, stay somewhere. I mean, look, I'm like disclaiming and revamping my advice in the middle of before I even give it. But I'll say it first, then I'll disclaim. I feel like better to be more than ready to accomplish something than less than ready. Like, why not wait until you're like, oh man, like, I don't know if I think I've learned everything that there is to learn here, which will never be true, before you then go on. Because I have so many friends who like got to be on TV later than all of their friends, or after, and they're like, oh man, I really wanted to do it, but then they're like, it was good that it happened later. It's good, I was better, with more years and more experience under your belt. They, as they say, never have a second chance to make a first impression. And not that first impressions are everything, but certainly wherever you start out, if you start out in New York and everyone there, all the clubs see your auditions and you're not as good as you're going to be, then eventually when you are good, you're basically the comedian that cried wolf, You're like, no, I'm really good now. And they're like, we've heard that
it's
before.
That guy again. Oh my God. It's like, no, look.
No, it's different. I've improved. I learned, I listened, I went to other places. It's 40 years later. Like,
so it sounds like even if you're from New York, you should probably like go somewhere else for a bit and come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's perhaps impractical for the people that already are here. Like, you can start and do things like under the radar. Like, there's certainly shows, but you'll just see other people. You'll see the gigantic comedians who are just everywhere and dropping into shows. But when I first moved here, I'd been like working. I just sort of started working full time as a comedian around the year that I moved to New York, which is 2008, which was part of my moving. I'm like, oh, I think I can be traveling and making money doing it, and also starting over in New York like I want to. But like, I did a lot of open mics then, and I hadn't really been doing as many open mics, I'd gotten sort of settled in the Boston scene. But I'm like, okay, starting over, I'll go wherever I can, wherever I have to, wherever I'm invited, wherever I'm welcome. And like, I found some like music open mics, and then other, just, like anything. Anywhere that you can get on stage obviously is good, especially if there are people who want you to be there and or are listening. But so if you're in New York, you don't have to leave to start, but it could be smart.
And as like a lot of people that read my Substack, they are like aspiring professional comedians. Do you have any like specific kind of advice? Like, how do you do it? Like, what was your big break and how do you do it?
Sure. Number one, I actually I have a friend named Keith Lowell Jensen who has a...
Is that LOL?
I actually don't even know. It should be, but
pretty cool.
It is. Yeah, no, I'm like, yeah, you should. This is great. We're already editing for people. Take out that WEL and just leave the other LOL. That's so I feel like maybe I've thought of that, but it really feels like wow, it's right there. But he's a funny comedian who asked me just this week to he asked me questions, advice for younger comedians, and so I will I could pull up what I wrote to him, but I'll just sort of revamp. Basically, it takes longer than you think, or you'll want it to. And again, maybe that's not true for everybody, but there's going to be, as Ira Glass says, like a gap between, how good you want to be or what you're going to be capable of and what your actual skill level is at first. I mean, really, the only advice for starting out is just do it, just get on stage as much as you can, write as much as you can, record all of your sets, whether video or audio, and like listen back to them and watch them again and like, see both what works with audiences, and eventually, I guess this is a piece of advice that I learned sort of organically over the years, and probably me saying it won't help anyone have the epiphany right now because you'll need to do it, but that ultimately you are going to be the one who decides what you do and what you say and what you want to do, as opposed to in the beginning, I say this sometimes, that I was more asking jokes than telling jokes. And because it's like, is this one? How about this? What do you think? And obviously that attitude is not necessarily the most conducive when an audience is like, aren't you supposed to be telling? I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what I'm doing. And like, we definitely don't know what you're doing. But eventually, so you try, I threw a lot of stuff at the wall, saw what stuck. And then I would just keep doing the things that worked, whatever things they were. Like some of them might have been meaningful about things that I cared about my life, my relationships, my social justice opinions, and then other things were just like pop culture, movies I liked, or absurdity, or wordplay, or whatever, just things that were fun, but, not necessarily meaningful in any larger way. I mean, fun and joy are, I think, meaningful inherently, but, I wasn't exclusively like, a political comedian, but I was like, oh, every once in a while I have a joke about gay marriage. That's good. And
Go
about,
me.
Veganism. Yeah. But this is all to say, eventually, like years later, I realized, like, I thought I was following what I was sort of like following what the audiences were laughing at. And like, I'll do that. I'll do what they like because that's what. And I wasn't like writing things specifically because I thought that people would like it, but I'm like, of all the things that I'm writing, I'll just do the things that other people agree with me on, other things that the people like. But eventually I got to a place where I'm like, I actually can write whatever I want, and I can make it, and I can spend more time on it if it's more important to me. Like there's a scene in, I think it's like an outtake in the Jerry Seinfeld's movie Comedian. I don't know. Do you know, is Jerry Seinfeld a comedian?
Yeah.
That,
I just know from Substack.
People know.
Yeah.
Perfect. And the scene he's talking about, like that some jokes just cut, like don't, like, he's like, you really want them to work, and he like doesn't, an act out of like, he's like, I'm like a mother bird, and I'm trying to teach it how to fly. I'm like getting in a big chicken suit or something. And I'm like, look, like this bird, do this joke. And it's, and you try and you try and you try because you care about it so much. And he's like, and then some jokes just come out ready to go, like full formed, like I'm a joke, and it flies out of the nest and it exists and it works. And I think the idea was that sometimes he doesn't care about that one, and he does care about the one. And I think that, for me, I don't know if this was the message that he was offering, but like, I do like spending lots of, obviously like think about how much time you're spending and how much energy you're devoting. But I think that if you do, my friend Ramin Nazer is a fantastic comedian and artist, and he has a piece of art where it's just like a guy throwing a clock at a big, like colorful mess of like, sort of abstract shapes and things. And the caption is, just throw time at it until it's a thing.
Yeah. I thought you were going to make a Salvador Dali joke for a second. I don't know.
I've made a few of those, but I'm trying to think now. Yeah, I do one every day in my newspaper, the Salvador Daily. That's the only one I have. But it's the first of many, one a day for the rest of my life. But yeah, just the idea that putting time and effort and work into it, like it is a marathon. And so there's a thing I read in a book called, it's by a guy named Jay Sankey. It's called Zen and the Art of Stand-Up Comedy. And he says...
Oh, yeah, I read that one, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The thing that I literally remember one thing from reading it 20 years ago.
It's more than me.
Yeah. And the thing is, the show that you're doing tonight is not important. What is important is the comedian that you'll be in 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's meaningful. And also, the show that you're doing tonight is the only one that's happening right now. So, make the most of it. And it can also be important because this moment is all that we have. But yeah, I just think, especially when you're starting out, like, you don't know. I remember there was a documentary that some open mic comedians made once that I saw years ago, and it's called Open Mic. And they were documenting their own open mic journey, but then they got to interview like tons of, really successful comedians about their open mic days. And I think it was Richard Jenny who has said something like, I'll paraphrase, he was like, if you're starting out and you feel like you suck and everything sucks and your jokes all suck and everyone's telling you that you suck and audiences are saying that you suck, he's like, you're probably on the right track. Like, it's just how it is. It takes time, and hopefully, you can, I guess, compare yourself to your past self. Like whatever you're doing now, if you started a year ago, look back at your first sets and like, have you written any jokes that you like, that audiences have liked? Have you gotten better, at comporting yourself on stage, at not throwing up before going out? Whatever, baby steps you need to see that you are making progress, and if you're not, then do something else. But
yeah, I had a terrible time in London because I didn't follow that kind of advice, and there was just so many people around me, people doing better than me, who were kind of started around the same time, but mainly like so many people doing better than me that had been doing it for ages, and I still just like let it all get into my head. Had a little bit of a breakdown, but it's kind of what like a lot of people who have breakdowns ended up in Berlin, Germany, and it all worked out in the end. But yeah, it's such good advice, and it's so hard to take when you're in the middle of a breakdown.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, and
you're like, no, I think I'm right about this. Yeah, I think I suck. Thank you, though. Thanks for trying.
I mean, I will say this, that also in order, like everyone truly. Like, I mean, you can look and be like, well, wasn't this person like didn't Bill Hicks, wasn't he good when he was 15 just starting out? And yes, but yeah, that's like there's thousands of other comedians. And also, Bill Hicks was not as good at 15 as he would be at 30. Like, everyone isn't as good. Like, I would love to see one comedian that somebody's like, they were good when they were 17 and now they're horrible at 50. Like, it doesn't seem possible at all. Like, you definitely will improve. And however bad you are when you're starting, there's even more room for improvement. Do you understand? Like, to climb Mount Everest is impressive, but if you're starting all the way halfway up, that's not as impressive. If you're starting in the Marianas Trench, then you're, getting out of the ocean and up the mountain, you're improving. There's more room for improvement the worse you are.
And some of the best comedians I know were really bad at it for ages, including improvisers, actually. And then they found something much more unique, actually, by just you've just got to follow those strands of your own self along. And whereas people who are good straight out the gate, they're often people who just have absorbed a lot of stand-up comedy that's in the ether. So it's not, they're good and they have a lot of confidence, but they're kind of like doing impressions of other stand-up comedians for a while. And actually, they have a bit of a tougher time later down the road where they're like, actually, I'm not really, who am I as a comedian,
Yeah, that's a great point. So I would say along those lines, like, be sort of an investigative journalist of your own self, be like an anthropologist of your own life and of your own work. Like I studied linguistics, and there's a concept of sometimes people think like, oh, that means you're telling people how they should speak, and it's not. Linguistics is about describing how people do speak, not prescribing how people should. And I think being descriptive rather than prescriptive, like, look at, especially if you've already started, like, look at what you have done and what has worked for you and audiences, where, like, find those strands, like you said, and be like, what created those? What led to those? What are the things that are true and unique and meaningful of and to you? And like it may take a long time to have a lot of them, and you learn by doing. So you might 10 years in look back at your first year's worth of jokes, and hopefully you'll be like, that was bad. Like, if you're 20 years in and you're like, I think my best jokes were the ones that I was just starting out. Like, it has to be, if you're at the beginning, it's a mountain that you're climbing, and it doesn't make sense to start at the top.
As I say, just all great advice that's impossible to take when you're on the scene. I wanted to ask you, because I just noticed that you're very, very prolific. You have many albums on Spotify. And how do you stay so prolific?
Honestly, it's willingness to quote unquote fail, and I think every comedian has that to some degree. You must know going into it that you're not going to please every audience. Love Hedberg's joke, I can't please all the people all the time, and last night all those people were at my show. Like, you're going to have bad shows in the beginning, probably, if you rank them, more bad shows than good ones, And I think there's some comedians who every time they're in front of an audience or a good audience or whatever audience it is, like, they're like, I have to do well. And and maybe they'll try, one new tag, one new idea, like, sandwiched in between. Like, I'm going to open with a strong 5. I'm going to close with a strong 5. And I'll permit myself to try like 2 new bits in the middle if the first one works. And I think it's good that, when I started out at a place called the Comedy Studio, and like to perform there on a Saturday night was the original goal, And like, man, if I could just do that, that's the show, And now I will, when I go back there, if I'm not headlining, if I'm just doing like stopping in, like that might be a place where I try brand new things, I might try brand new things on a Saturday night there.
And they're like, please stop doing that.
Yes, I'll never do it again.
This is a very important show.
Yeah. And, or Chris Rock, he goes to the Comedy Cellar, reads off of a notepad,
Right.
And he's like trying out new ideas because that's his open mic.
And that's the goal now.
Ultimately, yeah. If I'm performing at the Comedy Cellar, then I am like doing my best to put on a very good show. I will absolutely not try brand new things there. I guess the answer to your question is, it's got to be different for everyone, but part of it, I think, is that having places where you can experiment, where you can riff, where you can write on stage, where you can do anything, say new things, where you're not worried about being invited back or who's going to be seeing you or the industry or a manager or anything, like just having a place that is like purely like this coming Saturday, I'm doing a show that I did one in like January where I just called it New Year, New Jokes, $10, and pitching it as like, these are not going to be like things that I've never said, maybe some things that I've never said, but some ideas that I've just been like noodling on, like a premise, a beat, a thing, and I'm like, I'm just going to see what happens, And so I'm doing another one of those where I'm just like excited because I'm like, I'm just going to like empty out my brain, And so I think it's important to have a place to empty out the brain. And I think it's that my girlfriend phrases it like this. She says, like, when I'm coming up with new ideas, like a new show, she calls it the blooming phase. Just like constantly writing, constantly performing, constantly riffing. And then eventually when it's, time to curate it into its final form, or quote unquote final form, then she calls it the pruning phase, So first get it all out there, and then like it takes time. I think so. The first resource is like permission, permission to uncensor yourself, when you're writing, and then decide what are the things that are the most meaningful to perform and do it as much as possible. And living in New York now, and a fertile scene in Boston before, those were also valuable. Also, I talk faster than a lot of people, so I can say more jokes in a given short amount of time than other people can. And not to say that, there's some people who speak slowly and are also prolific. But yeah, I think it's just not the combination of caring and not caring, because some comedians are like, I don't care what the audience, or I don't care what anyone thinks. And it's like, well, on some level you must care what they think, or why would you do anything at all? I just like to go into rooms
in front of people. Yeah.
So
I really think you hit on something amazing there, which is just to not be scared of coming up with new stuff and performing new stuff. And in Berlin, where the stakes could not be lower, even at the most important show we have, they couldn't be lower. We don't have, for English language people anyway, we don't have any TV or anything like that. There's nobody. It's a bunch of drunk people. It's really fine. And people are still, I see them clinging on to old jokes, and it's like, for what? For why? And that's, it's even a situation I got myself into in London, where I just wasn't creating new material. And the more you're doing old stuff over and over again, sure, it's getting a laugh, as Myq Kaplan might say, in the middle laugh. But then you end up just kind of, you're like, what? This is cringe, what I'm doing. And
the worst version of it is you do something that always works and it doesn't work. And then you're like, now you're kind of doing it. It's, I'd rather, fail on my own merits, quote unquote, like fail my way than succeed somebody else's. Like the idea that you I think you made a great point earlier, like I'm the one who decides. I decide, whether I tell jokes again or whether I don't, whether I work on one thing for 1,000 years or whether I try a new thing every moment, and somewhere in between, like some work on one thing for 1,000 years, then try a few other things a moment at a time. But yeah, here's a story that I think will be helpful and sort of related. A guy asked me once, he said he'd done like an open mic or two, but he really wanted to get into comedy. And I said, well, why haven't you done more? Like, that's all you have to do is do it. And he said that he was afraid. And I said, what are you afraid of? And he's like, well, I'm afraid audiences won't laugh at my jokes. And I was like, well, I've got great news for you, because fear is about the unknown. And it is almost guaranteed that they will not laugh at your jokes. So nothing to fear, just know it. Know it and own it and go in and like know that it's not going to go well and be pleasantly surprised if one joke. I heard somebody on Maron's podcast once talking, and he's like a successful comedian, producer, writer today. I forget really who it is, but I remember what he said. So, Maya Angelou wasn't exactly right. I know how it made me feel, but I also remember what he said, which is like, I'm going to go into my first set, very first time doing comedy. He's like, I know it's not going to go well. I know a lot of things aren't going to work. If one joke out of 20 works, then I'll keep doing it. And he's like, and 2 jokes worked. Double what I expected. So just really to separate, the expectation. I think I just heard Joseph Goldstein, the Buddhist teacher, talk about the difference between expectation and aspiration. Like, if you have expectations, you're going to be disappointed. If you have aspirations, but just know where you are as best you can. It's good to have some delusional self-confidence to get you up there, to be like, I have things that are meaningful to say, at a time when I didn't, for sure, when I was a young 20-something straight white male in America. My voice is the one that's missing from the societal consensus. But do that. And also then eventually develop some kind of more potentially brutal, but hopefully just accurate self-assessment and be like, where am I? And go from there.
Yeah. And you're so right about there needing to be shows that you have where you really don't feel any stakes, where you can just feel free. And I actually wrote an article about that quite recently, about the importance of new material nights, improvised stand-up nights. I'm a big fan of that as well. Do you have anything like that do you go to anything like that in New York?
Yes, there's a few different clubs that have specific new joke nights, which is really interesting because like before those arose or became more popular, like you just have to make one for yourself, if not like a specific night, but be like, well, at this show, this one's a new joke one for me, or a couple here and there. But it is nice that it sets the expectation for the audience, and some people come in and they do, sets full of jokes that I've seen before. They're not brand new, but it does give, the comedians leeway and permission to do anything. And the audience is there for it. I remember, like, over a decade ago, this Jason Zinnemann, who writes about comedy for the New York Times, followed me around for a couple months. And like he did a piece called like The Evolution of a Joke, or the birth of a stand-up joke. And so he watched as, hold on one moment, my thing's doing a weird thing again, but we are still going. So he followed me around and he saw a joke the first time I tried it at all, and till eventually I got to do a version of it on Conan. And, we didn't know that was going to be how it ended up, but it ended up being really nice for the story and for the joke and for me. But the reason I'm bringing it up now is, I guess, just to brag that I got to do that.
Yeah,
and
you're on Conan. We get it.
I remember. So that article came out, and it talked about, my process by which sometimes I start with an idea like that's looser than it will eventually be in its, in its completed form. And
I'm going to link to that article because that sounds fascinating, actually. And I'm pretty sure my my American friend told me about that when I said you were going to be on the podcast. I remember he was saying about the evolution of a joke. I thought that sounds so interesting. So I'm glad that you reminded me of
yes,
that.
Of course. happy to share it. And yeah, I really still I feel like it holds up. But I remember I got into like an online beef, I suppose, a discussion, a heated discussion with a guy who I never met in life, but is a comedian and or was at the time. And he had very strong opinions about what was like reasonable for a comedian to present to an audience. And that the idea of presenting a joke that was less than completed in your mind was like irresponsible or disrespectful to the audience. Ooh. And I was like, even if it's presented in the form of like a new joke night, that I'm probably not, he wouldn't have gone as far as to say like, you can't do that at an open mic, but just like he was like very broadly under many circumstances. He's like, I want, to present only like curated comedy symphonies for the audience. As opposed to,
so for him,
jazz.
Jokes just come out perfect. Like, or he works on them at home in front of teddy bears until you're absolutely right. Like the kind of Seinfeld basement with the cardboard cutouts that I think might just be a myth, but.
Yes. Yeah. I think 100%. I think that, I don't know what that guy's life was like or is like, but I think that maybe he was more of a writer than a stand-up, or at least he spent a lot of his time writing. And I used to be like that also. I used to, do a lot of stuff in the lab, but the lab isn't where you find out what happens in reality, outside of the lab. Like, and comedy in front of an audience, is its own kind of lab, but that's the one that you need to, that's the one that counts, not the one
And you're
at
always
home.
going to find little funny things in the moment that there's no way you could think of at home. And they're sometimes the best things or the goofiest things anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So this has been fantastic. I think we'll call it to a close here. It's been so nice to speak to you. It's been so nice to meet your in voice and video face.
Yes.
It's been great.
100%.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to plug that's maybe more of an online thing? I guess I possibly have subscribers in New York. So if you can plug whatever you want and I'll link it.
Sure. Thank you.
Downstairs.
I'll say first, if you are in New York, if this comes out before August 22nd, 2024, that is when I'm filming my newest comedy special. It is an hour that I brought to Edinburgh last year that my girlfriend created with me about our relationship. And it's called Before We Get Started. And so that will eventually be something that you can watch via the internet or wherever it ends up. But if you're in New York on August 22nd, I would love to have you at the taping. But in the meanwhile, my website, MyqKaplan.com, MyQ Kaplan is how I spell Myq. It's weird. But if you spell Myq that way, and look for Myq Kaplan on all the social media, I'm there. My Substack is MyqKaplan.substack.com. I mostly share, just, fun little jokes once in a while. And occasionally when people ask me for advice, I share advice and other longer pieces. I have a book called Heartbrain Art Train that my friend Ramin Nazer and I created, where he illustrated my jokes, basically. Every page a joke with a beautiful image by him, and that's at my website and his website. I have a podcast called Broccoli and Ice Cream that I'm excited to have you on at some point as well.
I'd be delighted.
Where I talk to people about the work of their life, the broccoli, and the joys of their life, the ice cream, and then another podcast I do called The Faucet, where it's basically it's usually just me, but actually recently, the most recent episode I put out is a Q&A with another friend of mine, Leah Renee, who is a newer comedian, though around my age. And so she's a good friend, and she has a lot of questions about starting comedy. Specifically, she came to Edinburgh last year. She's coming again this year. And she's only a couple years in, but she has like big goals, big dreams, and had a lot of questions. So I'm doing a series of answering her questions. And if anyone else out there has questions and want to send them to me, I will probably cover them either on my Substack and or on my podcast, The Faucet. But I guess I probably should have started with this. Mainly, if you want to experience my comedy and you aren't a place where I am performing live, I have a bunch of albums on all of the streaming platforms, your Spotify's, Apple Music's, Amazon's, and YouTube's and such. So yeah, there's a bunch of them out there. The most recent one that I recorded that is available to everyone is called AKA and it's from a show that I did at Edinburgh in 2018, and it's one of my proudest works that I'm happiest with. But also there's a lot of other ones that I love. So yeah, feel free to listen to my comedy. Put my name wherever you want, and you'll find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Myq. I guess I'll see you around on Substack and whatnot. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you so much. A great pleasure.